Hi everyone, Paul here from FamilyWheels.ca with another car review for your growing family. And this week we're looking at a new car that isn't really actually that new. And that's because when Scion bit the dust last year, a number of the orphan vehicles in the company's lineup got rolled up into the parent company Toyota, so the Scion FR-S became the Toyota 86 like we have here this week. Now if this looks a lot like its biggest competitor in the market, the Subaru BRZ, that's because these cars are ostensibly the same vehicle. Subaru and Toyota partnered up back in 2012 to develop this vehicle. They both brought their separate know-how to the table. This car is actually made in a Subaru production facility. But of course, when Scion bit the dust, Toyota didn't want to just leave this car to Subaru, so they rolled it up into the Toyota brand. It was very important that they keep a sports car in their lineup. When you look at the history of Toyota, they've really cranked out some remarkable cars over the years. The S800, the 2000 GT, the Supra, the newer LFA, and the car that this vehicle's been named after. A bit of an homage here, because the Toyota Corolla AE86, that's the 86 we're talking about here, was famously fun to drive. It was the last rear-wheel drive Corolla ever built by the company, and it has a real cult following because it was such a blast. Now we've got beautiful summery open roads here this week, and unlike my motorcycle, I can actually throw my kid into the back seat of this thing. Yes, there is a back seat, but it is very tight, so I want to see how it stacks up this week, not just for fun to drive factor, but also for livability with a family. So stick around. It's the new Toyota 86 this week here on Family Wheels. Well, I've got to be honest with you, sometimes when I'm getting ready to do a review for you guys, the amount of homework I've got to do is just crazy, because cars these days, they come with so many trims and engines and options to wade through that it takes a lot of time to really make sense of it all, which is why a car like the 86 is so refreshingly different. This vehicle doesn't have a lot of options. I'm in the base trim here this week at $29,500. On board this car, we've got a 2-liter 4-cylinder boxer engine. We've got a dual rear exhaust. We've got 17-inch alloy wheels, sport bucket seats, a 6.1-inch infotainment system with a rear backup camera, and that's a good thing because the visibility out of this car is not great when I look out behind that back window for parking. But other than that, there's not much to it. You can get into the special edition for about $32,500. That's giving you leather seats, it's giving you heated front seats, you get a spoiler in the back, and then speaking of performance, you get this special performance-oriented data display giving you things like G-force reading, you get stopwatch if you're going to be racing with it, then you get dual zone climate control in that special edition as well. But those are kind of your options. That's it. And I really like that here in this car. That is one of the things that I noticed as soon as I hopped on board. It's pretty simple, and not everyone's going to like that because you don't get all the creature comforts here in this base trim. I have these very old school, kind of clunky feeling climate control functions. There's this very cheesy looking sort of faux carbon fiber inlay throughout, but then elsewhere some really nice attention to detail as well. This kind of Alcantara inspired suede, very sporty feeling materials in the doors, on the dashboard, the feeling of the steering wheel, leather wrapped, really nice. I like these bucket seats. The bolsters really support you through the corners. They hug you really nicely. So it seems like Toyota spent the money where they really needed to with this car, and otherwise they kind of said, let's keep it simple. And for a lot of people, they're going to really enjoy that about this vehicle, and it's kind of grown on me here this week. There are some pretty significant changes for 2017 though. First up, it's a bit more of an aggressive exterior styling. We've got new front and rear bumpers. LED tail lights now come on this car for 2017 as well. Once you look at the performance of this vehicle, the suspension's been tuned and refined. We also get 5 horsepower more out of the standard transmission in this vehicle for 2017, and that's because the rear differential's been tuned. So if you get this car with the 6-speed manual transmission, you're getting 205 horsepower out of this little 4-cylinder now. If you do opt for the automatic transmission in this car, you're not going to get that 5 horsepower boost. You're going to get 200 horsepower out of this engine like we saw in the previous version of the Scion FR-S. Another thing that's been improved upon for 2017 though is engine friction, which means that your fuel economy is going to be better than ever in this car, and that's one of the things that really impresses me about the 86 is that its fuel economy is outrageously good for a throaty little sports car. I've averaged this week 7.8 liters per 100 kilometers, and that's well below what Toyota suggests you should see as well, which is ranging between 8.3 to 11.3 liters per 100 kilometers. And it's not like I've driven this car really carefully this week either. That's me driving on city roads, that's me driving on the highway, that's me taking it easy, and that's me also kind of giving the beans a little bit to this car too. So it's cool to see that you can have a car that is performance oriented, but also still very fuel efficient at the end of it all. But because this does have a relatively fuel-efficient, small 4-cylinder engine on board, I gotta be honest, you're not gonna find off-the-line performance to be particularly blistering. I mean, we compare this to the V8 Mustang that I was driving around this time last year. Bottomless power that just chewed up the pavement right off the stoplight. This takes a little while to get up to speed, and then that's when it really shines. It really does like to accelerate very eagerly, like a little Jack Russell Terrier once you do get it up to speed. It's also such an incredible cornering car. Rear-wheel drive, it's light, its suspension has been so nicely tuned. I could corner through mountainous roads with this car all day long. Honestly, this does invoke that same kind of fun factor as I see in my motorcycle when I go out for a rip in it. And it also reminds me a lot of the Focus RS in that respect that I was driving around a couple of months ago. But unlike the Focus RS, this has a far more livable suspension. You're not feeling every tiny little bump. I felt like my teeth were going to be shaken right out of my mouth with that car. This is much more livable. It's also not such a low car that you feel every time you go over a tiny little speed bump, you're going to rip the entire underpinnings of this vehicle right out from under you. One thing that's not quite so livable though, it's pretty noisy in here. It's actually the loudest interior that we've ever tested with our decibel reader test. At 100 kilometers an hour on the same stretch of road we always test on, I hit 73 decibels. That means that you're going to have to speak up if you're talking to the person next to you while you're driving along on the highway. You're really going to have to crank the volume up. But to be honest, this week I really haven't even had the radio on that much, because for a 4-cylinder, which often doesn't really give you that much of a great engine note, this is one of the best sounding 4-cylinders that I've ever come across, and because of that, it means that the radio's been turned off a lot more than it's been on this week. Now, a big reason for why this car has been so much fun to drive this week has got to be this 6-speed manual gearbox. It was developed by Toyota. It's got this great sort of analog feel to it. You can really feel the gears clicking into place. It's short throw and it lines up perfectly with what this car is supposed to be all about. Now, you can get this vehicle, as I mentioned before, with an optional $1,200 automatic transmission. It's a 6-speed. It's been pulled from the Lexus IS sports sedan and tuned ever so slightly. But honestly, if you're buying this car, do yourself a favor. If you don't know how to drive standard transmissions, learn, because this vehicle really does come to life with this manual gearbox, and it is such a perfect accompaniment to the 86. If I'm saying addictive a lot here this week, it's for good reason, because between the rear-wheel drive aspect of this vehicle, the sound that you get out of this engine, the cornering feel, the shifting feel out of this gearbox, for $30,000, this is like the joy of driving distilled into a very reasonably priced package. Well, now seems like as good a time as any to talk about the elephant in the room here, which is the question that you all have waiting on your lips. Paul, why on earth are you testing a Toyota 86 red sports car on a family-focused car review channel? And the fact is, I wanted to drive it. It looked like fun, but also it has seating for 4. It does have a second row. So unlike the Mazda MX-5, which is a big competitor for this car, you can fit 4 people in this thing. And that's an important thing to think about because this is a vehicle that has, according to Toyota Canada, a target demographic of young men between the ages of 25 to 34 years old. And it's that age category, when you think about it, where often you get the news that guess what? You've got a kid on the way. So can this work for families? The fact is, it is one of the tighter second rows I've ever sat in my life. I've tested a couple of coupes on the channel now, and this is definitely the tightest. However, if you do have somebody who's on the shorter side in the driver's seat or the front passenger seat, even me at 6'2", I can sit back here, not comfortably, but I can make a go of it. If you are tall like me and you're sitting in the driver's seat, forget about it. It's kind of like a 911 at that point. There's no legroom back here whatsoever. The surprise for me, though, was that car seats actually fit. We have the proper latching points back here for them, and if you have them in front-facing mode, like we've had this week with Roger, I've actually been able to give him enough legroom back here and still have enough legroom for Devin to sit modestly comfortably up in the front passenger seat. If you're looking for rear-facing mode car seats, it's a different story. You can fit one back here, but it writes off the front passenger seat entirely. So what I'm saying here basically is that you don't want to trade in your big 7-passenger family hauling SUV in for an 86. However, if you've already got one in the family and you find out you have kids on the way, then you could make it work, I think, for a family with 1 child. However, with 2 kids, it's going to be a squeeze, again, especially if you've got taller people sitting in the front row. Now, while I'm back here, I want to show you something else which has been a bit of an issue for me this week, and that's visibility in this car. This tiny little window here doesn't really offer any of it at all. In fact, this pillar right here and this pillar right here have created one of the most challenging blind spots that I've ever encountered in any of our test drives. Now let's hop back and take a look at the trunk in this thing, which again offered a bit of a surprise for me. So before I get to the actual trunk capacity, here's a weird trend that I've been seeing in a few vehicles lately that is really bothersome to me, and that's that there actually is no trunk release button on the actual trunk itself. I have to use the key fob, and I press and hold this button right here and the trunk pops and I can open it. But sometimes you just want to be able to, if the car's unlocked, use the button right on the trunk. It's just a lot more convenient. I don't know why car companies are doing that. But once we do get this trunk popped, we've got 200 liters or 196 liters of trunk capacity in the 86. And guess what? I actually have been able to fit our entire standardized trunk test into this thing. It took some creative packing, but I could do it. And that includes a stroller, a diaper bag, a backpack, a couple of bags of groceries, and a basketball in this tiny little car. I couldn't believe it. And if you do want to have a little bit more space in this vehicle, you can also fold down the second row seats and give yourself even a little bit more storage capacity. That is the biggest surprise of this test so far. Don't expect much height in this trunk because it is rather low slung, and it's also not particularly deep, but wow, we made it work. When I first got into this car here this week, its stripped down simplicity, it was a bit off-putting, but that's actually what I've really grown to love about the 86 this week. The mechanical clunk as you're shifting through gears, that real connection as you're driving through tight corners, and it's also, because of that simplicity, still very affordable for what you're getting. And of course, it's got that Toyota reliability built into it as well, which means that it's going to be with you for a really long time. And since it is so basic and simple, it also doesn't feel like it's the kind of car all of the bells and whistles and glitz and glamour in the infotainment system are going to feel like they're out of date 5 years down the road. And it's also great to see that the 86 has drummed up a bit more interest since it's been rebranded as a Toyota as well. If we look at sales figures here from January to May of 2017, Toyota managed to sell 7 times more 86s than Scion did FR-Ss in the same time frame in 2016. So hopefully, long live the 86, because it's certainly not the most obvious of family car choices, that's for sure, but it does have a back seat, and it's certainly more practical than my motorcycle. I'll have to give it that, and just as grin-inspiring.